Good morning, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff_2020. And this morning, I had a minefield scheduled, but I've been investigating these books that I got about a week or two ago, both of them by Paul L. Williams and Rodney Howard Brown. The first one is called The Killing of Uncle Sam, and the second one is our book for this morning. Oops, hang on a second. What's going on there? What in the heck? Oh my, I'm sorry about that. What is that? Skip ads. Oh, this must be because I got remonetized. I was happy to find yesterday, and thanks to Norman Smith for my very first super chat on McDuff_2020. And wow, I mean, I was surprised, but I did, file the appeal, and anyway, successfully with that. But I apologize for that that little ad that just played. And let me see if I can get you guys back now. I'm a little confused about this. Hang on. Okay, I think I see me now. In the chat, did you guys see an ad before this started? Just wondering. Hey, Tangent, I don't know about GW's Twitter. I don't know why it would get canceled. He was on earlier this morning, so I suspect he's not canceled. Anyway, apologize for being a little rough getting started this morning. What a night last night with the gang out in Atlanta, and also with a great Professor Hamamoto chiming in with some great cultural references, and it was a lot of fun. Let's see, it was a great advertisement. Okay, high energy and epic. Okay. Well, I'm going to try to adjust it so we don't have to have those. I'm glad to have the super chats, but I don't like the those commercials that they put on them. So anyway, bottom line, I'm glad to be back, and it started with an ad yesterday too, Pete. I see. Okay. Well, thanks for letting me know on that, and let's get started with our book. I was telling you that I got these two books at the same time. The one that was written first is The Killing of Uncle Sam, The Demise of the United States of America. And the second one is called Killing the Planet, How a Financial Cartel Doomed Mankind. And it's the financial cartel part that attracts me to this book more than the other. The other one, of course, I haven't read it, but I've lived through the chapters and everything, and I think we've covered a lot that was in this book. I certainly will go through it again. I mean, I'll go through it more carefully to see what we can mine out of this. But I'm not planning to read this whole book because I think a lot of it we've covered. But now let's get to what I really am excited to do, is to read this Killing the Planet, How a Financial Cartel Doomed Mankind. Now here's a preface. This preface is called A Message to the Reader, and you all know Paul L. Williams from his great book Operation Gladio, which I read and will be reposting as soon as I can, so that people can hear it, because it's a great exposition of the CIA, the Mafia, and the Vatican working together. Money laundering, selling dope, trafficking in whatever, and helping Nazis escape justice. Pardon me a second. Here's the blurb from Amazon, which I think is as good an introduction as any. In Killing the Planet, How a Financial Cartel Doomed Mankind, best-selling authors Rodney Howard-Browne and Paul L. Williams investigate the true motives and consequences of the Pilgrim Society. Early members of the society included J.P. Morgan, Andrew Carnegie, Andrew Mellon, Cornelius Vanderbilt, Paul Warburg, Mortimer I. Schiff, Otto Kahn, and John D. Rockefeller. Although the Pilgrim Society and the powerful men involved are often praised for their philanthropic actions, Howard-Browne and Williams show that the society was self-serving and subjected the American people to a brutal system of economic tyranny, one which is still in place today. As a sequel to The Killing of Uncle Sam, Killing the Planet is a thoroughly documented and impeccably researched book with over 1,500 footnotes. It shows how mankind has become enslaved within the Luciferian world system that is managed and controlled by the world's wealthiest families. The book is not full of conspiracy theories, but instead, unfortunately for all humanity, full of gut-wrenching facts. And as far as reviews, I will read the first one here. Killing the Planet lays out in detail the evolution of financial control that has enabled central acquisition of power and control that is leading us all down the path of ruin and loss of freedoms. Quote unquote from William E. Binney. And of course, he is the great whistleblower of 9/11 who is working very closely with LaRouche Pack and Harley Schlanger, Barbara Boyd, and Kirk Wiebe to expose the fraud in this election as a matter of national urgency and security. So William Binney's review satisfies me. I'm in. So let's start with the prologue. The story starts in Africa, where an elite society of English Masons initiated a plan to forge a one-world government. The society was imbued with a belief in the superiority of the Anglo-Saxon race and the need to bring all of mankind under British rule. The members of the society had journeyed from England to seek their fame and fortune within the diamond pits of Kimberley on the Vaal River. The leader was Cecil John Rhodes, the son of an Anglican vicar. At 6'3" and 200 pounds, Rhodes was an imposing figure. He had a leonine head, light blue eyes, wavy brown hair, a carefully groomed mustache, and a ruddy complexion. The forcefulness of Rhodes's appearance was offset only by his tinny voice. Still in all, he possessed so much charisma that one contemporary claimed that, quote, belief in Rhodes was a substitute for religion, unquote. Rhodes was a social Darwinist, an avowed agnostic, a practitioner of the occult, a homosexual, and a pederast who surrounded himself with a stable of, quote, angels and lambs, unquote, in parentheses, young boys to furnish his sexual needs, close parentheses. And that is footnoted to an article February 13th, 2019 in the Sunday Tribune of South Africa. The idea of the society came to Rhodes on June the 2nd, 1877, the day he became a lifetime member of the Oxford University Apollo chapter of the Masonic Order. Rhodes immediately put the revelation to paper in a document that he called his, quote, confession of faith. Quote, the idea gleaming and dancing before one's eyes like a will-o'-the-wisp at last frames itself into a plan. Why should we not form a secret society with but one object, the furtherance of the British Empire and the bringing of the whole uncivilized world under British rule for the recovery of the United States, for the making the Anglo-Saxon race but one empire? The religious, political, and economic unification of the world, Rhodes realized by his vision, was an achievable goal. The process, in fact, had already begun, almost overnight. England had been industrialized by a revolution that gave birth to spinning machines and high-pressure steam engines that could be used not only in mining and manufacturing, but also to power locomotives and cargo ships. Huge foundries, munitions plants, canneries, and silk mills had sprouted up in cities throughout England. All because of this newborn concept of financial capitalism. Raw material was being shipped to English plants and factories from the four corners of the globe. Goods were being created in such a quantity that the surplus could be shipped out to ports throughout the world, and the English banking system came to the fore as the leading force in international affairs and economics. The population of England soared from 8.3 million in 1801 to 30.1 million at the time of Rhodes. Wealth became confined to those who controlled the means of production and finance. The industrial merchant became replaced by the industrial millionaire. Marx and Engels, in their Communist Manifesto, explained, quote, all old established national industries have been destroyed or are daily being destroyed. They are dislodged by new industries whose introduction becomes a life and death question for all civilized nations, by industries that no longer work up indigenous raw material, but raw material drawn from the remotest zones, industries whose products are consumed not only at home but in every quarter of the globe. In place of the old wants, satisfied by the production of the country, we find new wants, requiring for their satisfaction the products of distant lands and climes. In place of the old local and national seclusion and self-sufficiency, we have intercourse in every direction, universal interdependence of nations, unquote. The thought of Cecil Rhodes was inexorably bound to these changes in material productivity. In September 1877, Rhodes returned to Kimberley and his, quote, very small two-roomed corrugated iron house with a wooden floor, iron walls, and roof. To this humble dwelling he invited his closest friends and confidants for a dinner meeting. The guests included Joseph Orpin, who would become an influential administrator for the British Crown in South Africa, Henry Caesar Hawkins, son of the resident magistrate of the Umkomaas Valley, Alfred Beit, B-E-I-T, a German Jew who dealt in diamonds, Leander Starr Johnson, that's S-T-A-R-R for the record, a youthful physician, Charles Rudd, Shippard, and Louis Mitchell, a prominent South African banker who recorded the words of Rhodes to the gathering as follows. Gentlemen, I have asked you to dine because I want to tell you what I want to do for the remainder of my life. I think that if a man when he is young determined to devote his life to one worthy object and persists in that, he can do a great deal during that life, even if it is to be a short one, as I know my life to be. The object of which I intend to devote my life is the defense and the extension of the British Empire. The British Empire stands for the protection of all the inhabitants of a country in life, liberty, fair play, and happiness. and it is the greatest platform the world has ever seen for these purposes. It is mainly the extension of the empire northward that we have to watch and work for it in South Africa. The men in attendance were so moved by these remarks that they agreed to join with Rhodes in devoting their lives and wealth to the secret society. Their commitment was to be without personal reservation. For this reason, Rhodes urged his band of brothers to avoid all emotional entanglements, including marriage. Quote, "I hate people getting married," he said, "because they simply become machines and have no ideas beyond their respective spouses and offspring." The new initiates to the Kimberley Club took this advice to heart, thereby granting him a hint of monasticism to their society, which would evolve into a hotbed of homosexuals and pederasts. The first step toward a new world order, Rhodes maintained, was the conquest of Africa, with its vast reserves of diamonds, gold, iron ore, coal, and timber. Quote, "Africa is still lying ready for us. It is our duty to take it," he wrote in his confession. "It is our duty to seize every opportunity of acquiring more territory, and we should keep this one idea steadily before our eyes, that more territory simply means more of the Anglo-Saxon race, more of the best, the most human, most honorable race the world possesses." Well, so much for the Irish, eh? Excuse me a second. All right, beg your pardon. Well, 67 people watching now. That's great. Welcome, everyone. If you're new to the channel, I'm very glad to have you here. And if you're not, well, thanks for being faithful to us here at McDuff Channel. We like everyone else, have had a bit of a rough ride in the past month or two, but we are coming back with a vengeance. This is still my fall offensive, and I'm still taking names and going to take care of business. This book right here, I think, is so timely in connection with what we've been talking to Holly Schlanger about, how it is the oligarchs of the British royals and oligarchical families that are behind the threat to our election today, right now, this moment. So this is great background, in my opinion. Throughout his life, Rhodes's belief in the necessity of the British conquest of Africa remained unswerving. 15 years after penning his confession, he confided the following to William H. Stead, or Steed, S-T-E-A-D, one of his most ardent disciples. Quote, "If there is a God, it is clear that he would like me to do what he is doing himself. And he is manifestly fashioning the English-speaking race as the chosen instrument by which he will bring in a state of society based upon justice, liberty, and peace. He would like me to paint as much of the map of Africa British red as possible, and to do what I can elsewhere to promote the unity and extend the influence of the English-speaking race." To initiate the conquest, Rhodes and members of his society entered politics and became elected to the Parliament of the Cape Colony. By 1891, Rhodes became the Prime Minister, a position he would hold for the next 5 years. Addressing the Cape Parliament, Rhodes said, quote, "If you were to sleep for 25 years, you might find a gentleman called your Prime Minister sitting in Cape Town and controlling the whole, not only to the Zambezi, but to Lake Tanganyika." Now known as the, quote, Colossus, he initiated railway systems that ran from the Cape through the Orange State of the Boers and on to Johannesburg, and from southern Matabeleland to northern Mashonaland, Rhodesia. The dream that Rhodes expressed in his Confession of Faith was coming to fruition. Tens of thousands of British immigrants, lured by reports of gold, including the location of the fabled, quote, King Solomon's mines, and the offer of free land, moved from the overpopulated cities of England to the lands owned and controlled by Rhodes in South Africa. Within the new country that Rhodes called Zambezi, the new settlers came to produce more wheat, maize, and tobacco than anywhere else save America. Beef cattle thrived in the lowlands north of Bulawayo, and fruit, apples, oranges, lemons, pears, peaches, apricots, pineapples, strawberries, coconuts, and melons grew in such prodigious quantity that the highly profitable Rhodes fruit farms came into existence. To unify the vast continent into one enormous country, Rhodes laid plans for a Cairo to Cape Town railroad, a train that would traverse the Zambezi with its mighty falls, run through the meandering Congo, scale massive mountains like Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya, stretch boundless savannas and vast deserts, and circle lakes the size of small seas. The jungles would be cleared. The timber would be transported on railroad cars to the cities which would sprout up at the railroad stations. The natives would be pushed from their lands in accordance with the Glenn Gray Act, legislation initiated by Rhodes, and sent to work on the farms, factories, and industrial plants. Well, let's stop there and take a breath, okay? Here's Rhodes saying that the indigenous people are going to be removed from the land and put to work in industrial camps, farms, and factories. Well, this is just like a precursor, is it not, to the Holocaust. The same mentality applies. This work, Rhodes believed, would assist the black natives in shedding their slovenly habits. Quote, "It must be brought home to them," Rhodes said, "that in the future 9/10 of them will have to spend their lives in manual labor, and the sooner that is brought home to them, the better." The inexhaustible minerals, iron, coal, copper, nickel, lead, bauxite, and gold, of Africa would be mined by the black labor force. Riches beyond measure would be added to the British Empire, and it all seemed well within the grasp of Cecil Rhodes in 1895, when Zambezia was renamed Rhodesia in his honor. During this time, Rhodes made frequent trips to England, where he attracted a host of influential aristocrats to his secret society, now dubbed, quote, the Society of the Elect. The list of his new recruits included Lord Reginald Balliol, that's Baliol, Brett, Queen Victoria's closest advisor, Lord Archibald Primrose, the 5th Earl of Rosebery and Rothschild's son-in-law, who would serve as Britain's Prime Minister from 1894 to 1895, and Arthur James Balfour, the 1st Earl of Balfour, who would become the British Prime Minister from 1902 to 1905. Rhodes's ties to these three men would become tightened by their shared homosexuality and their preference for, quote, burly, blue-eyed boys, unquote. Among the other recruits were Albert Lord Grey and Robert Armstrong Yates, two prominent members of the British Parliament, William Palmer, the 2nd Earl of Selborne, Cardinal Henry Edward Manning, the leading Roman Catholic prelate in England. Isn't that interesting that a Catholic cardinal would be involved? General William Booth, the founder of the Salvation Army. William Stead, S-T-E-A-D, Britain's most prominent journalist. Harry Johnson, head of the British Consular Service in West Africa, and Alfred Milner, Under-Secretary of Finance in Egypt. Milner, who was also of questionable sexual orientation, merits special mention. Rhodes recognized in him the kind of steel that was required to pursue the dream of world domination. Quote, I support Milner absolutely without reserve. If he says peace, I say peace. If he says war, I say war. Whatever happens, I say ditto to Milner. But the most important recruit was Lord Nathan Rothschild, who had gained complete control of the Bank of England. Lord Rothschild was the leading member of the world's most influential banking families. The Rothschilds had established financial ties to such countries as Austria, Germany, Russia, Italy, France, Egypt, China, South Africa, India, New Zealand, and Australia. In the process, they established close relations with other Jewish banking families, including the Cohens, Warburgs, Schiffs, Kuhns, Loebs, Lazards, Lehmans, and Goldmans. These families worked together, shared resources, and engaged in joint business ventures. They shared a common Jewish heritage, maintained close social ties, and often intermarried. Quote, Natty Rothschild married the oldest daughter of Levi Barrett Cohen, a prominent London financier. Jacob Schiff, who had lived with the Rothschilds, moved to America and married the daughter of Solomon Loeb, L-O-E-B, the head of the Kuhn-Loeb banking dynasty. The two daughters of Marcus Goldman married the sons of Samuel Sachs to form Goldman Sachs. Paul Warburg left Hamburg for New York, where he married Nina Loeb, the daughter of Solomon Loeb. United by blood, marriage, and ethnicity, they provided funding to American businessmen and industrialists, including Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan. In this way, they created a money cartel that became the most powerful force on planet Earth. The members of the Society of the Elect met regularly at Mowbray House in London. The Society's original members shared much in common. Apart from Stead, they were personages of means who had been educated at Oxford or Cambridge. They were Masons, most members of the Apollo chapter. Even Manning, prior to receiving holy orders, had become a lodge member. There you go, a Catholic cardinal becoming a lodge member of a Masonic lodge. It's strange, but it happens. And I was just reading a week or so ago about James Hoban, the architect of the U.S. Capitol, who was also both a Catholic and a Freemason. These things have happened in history, and when they happen, look out, because these two powerful bodies of powerful men working together really can control the world. They were imperialists who had been influenced by the thoughts of John Ruskin and his belief that the world must be reshaped into an aesthetically pleasing whole. They were social Darwinists who believed that the British people, through the process of natural selection, had evolved into the master race. With the exception of Stead, they held positions of political power that would impact the course of British affairs. They all had cultivated strong ties to the Rothschild family, who had served as the governor of the Bank of England before becoming a prelate. And They all shared a deep interest in the occult, including theosophy. Theosophy, you guys are probably familiar with that word by now, but it's one of those things that comes along about the same time that Zionism and Lord Palmerston and a lot of these, the seances and all that, heebie-jeebie stuff, it's all part of the psyop, my opinion. Hey, Harry, it's great to see you here, man. Yeah, Springmeier, great source, and right, and then of course you have the whole Operation Gladio, where priests are joining Propaganda Due, and that Masonic lodge that included Henry Kissinger. Man, if you think Henry Kissinger hasn't cast a dark, long shadow over all our lives, you better think again. This man is pure, vicious destructiveness. And, obviously very much in line with what we've been hearing about this Pilgrim Society. Still focused on Africa and its vast riches, the Society plotted the Second Boer War, which raged from 1899 to 1902. As a result of this conflict, the Transvaal and the Orange Free State became incorporated into the British Empire. 6,000 Boers were killed in action, while 26,000 white civilians and 17,182 African natives died of disease and starvation in concentration camps that had been set up in territories previously ruled by the Boers. And once again, these are Nazis in all but name. In a letter to Lord Frederick Roberts, Alfred Milner wrote, quote, "I precipitated the crisis, which was inevitable before it was too late. It is not very agreeable and, in many eyes, not very creditable piece of business to have been largely instrumental in bringing about a big war," unquote. However, the 20,000 children who had died in the British concentration camps were of little consequence to Milner. When faced with criticisms about the atrocities, Milner responded, quote, "If we are to build up anything in South Africa, we must disregard, and absolutely disregard, the screamers," unquote. This just, I have to put a footnote here that anybody that thinks that this is a white-black racism thing needs to understand this story. Because those Boers were simply Dutch people, and some of the Huguenots that, from France. They are not, these are not African people. They're white people and just like the Jewish people in the Holocaust, it's anybody that's not part of our Anglo-Saxon elite club can be thrown in a concentration camp and left to starve or die of disease. That is important information for us Americans today. The second objective of the Society of the Elect toward a new world order was the restoration of America to the imperial fold of Great Britain. In his confession, Rhodes wrote, quote, "I once heard it argued by a fellow in my own college, I'm sorry to say, by an Englishman, that it was a good thing for us that we have lost the United States. There are some subjects on which there can be no arguments, and to an Englishman this is one of them. But even from an American's point of view, just picture what they have lost. Look at their government. Are not the frauds that yearly come before the public view a disgrace to any country, and especially theirs, which is the finest in the world? Would they have occurred had they remained under English rule? Great as they have become, how infinitely greater they would have been with the softening and elevating influences of English rule. Think of the countless number of Englishmen that during the last 100 years would have crossed the Atlantic and settled and populated the United States. Would they not have made without any prejudice a finer country of it than the low-class Irish and German immigrants? All this we have lost, and that country loses owing to whom? Owing to 2 or 3 ignorant, pig-headed statesmen of the last century. At their door lies the blame. Do you ever feel mad? Do you ever feel murderous? I think I do with these men. During his final years, the thoughts of Cecil John Rhodes turned more and more to the United States. William Stead observed, he was devoted to the old flag of the Union Jack, but in his ideas he was an American, and in his later years he expressed to me his unhesitating readiness to accept the reunion of the English race under the Stars and Stripes if it could not be obtained in any other way. Although he had no objection to the monarchy, he unhesitatingly preferred the American to the British Constitution, and the textbook which he laid down for his novitiates was a copy of the American Constitution. Rhodes believed that the unification of Britain and the United States would secure the peace of the world for all eternity and the creation of a, quote, universal language. This merger could be effected, Rhodes argued, by the strengthening of economic trade between the two nations. Trade would be unencumbered by tariffs. The planting of pilgrim societies in London and New York, where American and British bankers, businessmen, and industrialists could meet in private to outline their joint goals and objectives, and by the awarding of Rhodes scholarships to Oxford University for the best and brightest American students so that they could play an integral part in the formation of the new world order. Once sufficient support for the merger was achieved, he believed, the British House of Commons would unite with the U.S. Congress for the formation of a, quote, imperial parliament, the members of which would remain seated for 5-year terms, alternating their location between London and Washington, D.C. To effect this alliance, Rhodes dispatched leading members of his society, including Stead and Lord Rosebery, to travel to America in order to meet with the country's leading industrialists, including Andrew Carnegie and J.P. Morgan. As a result of these meetings, the American branch of the Rhodes Society was established at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York. This group would give birth to the Federal Reserve System, which would govern the American economy. It would also bring its own candidates to political power, including Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It would drag the United States into World War I, create the Great Depression, and establish the Council on Foreign Relations, which would gain complete control of the U.S. State Department. All of these developments took place according to plan. But something went haywire. The forger of this global government was supposed to be an international banker or a well-heeled aristocrat, but what happened in actual fact was incredible. The control of the world and the fate of mankind would fall into the hands of the hairless and humorless son of a horse thief. His name was John D. Rockefeller. Well, it's a very, very cogent and internally sound argument that's presented here. This is his prologue that I just read, and one that is so consistent with what we learned from Harley Schlanger about the British Empire. And then we consider the resonance of what Cecil Rhodes and Alfred Milner did to the Boers with the same thing that happens to the Jews later. And we have to consider, are they not willing to do that right here in the United States? Why not? Why not get rid of us non-Anglo-Saxon, intermarried, connected families, the ones that didn't get drawn into their master race? Why not find some way to just get rid of the rest of us? Overpopulation, eugenics. I think also the overtones of sexuality and what most people consider a perverted form of sexuality, that is pederasty, is something that they are boldly confronting in this book, and I applaud them for it. It's not something that I consider to be a core area of my study, but when we consider all of the kookiness that's associated with people like Bill Clinton, frankly, and then all of the scandals that we've endured that are still being covered up, like the Franklin scandal, we have to consider this all, once again, it all sounds like it could be one thing operating in different areas, whether it's in Omaha or London or Johannesburg. Yeah, Eustace Mullins agrees with all of this work too. Well, I think that reading this book is going to be helpful for putting all this information together and supporting the theory that Harley has given us, that it's the British City of London oligarchical nobility that is trying to destroy our elections, our republic, our individual rights, our economy, our very existence as a nation. And let's just take that seriously, very seriously. All right. Well, once again, thanks again for being with me. Thanks for all the work that each of you does to expose the deep state, what we call the New World Order, and what Harley calls the extended British Empire with justification. Yeah, straight arrow. Malik Brown. Where do you get a name like that's so close to Morlock and so close to Moloch? Um, well, coincidence, I guess. Thanks, everybody.